Welcome, Willow Run, to the second video in a series of 3 concerning the declarations and the bylaws and the proposed changes to those documents. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about voting. Voting has been kind of a topic of conversation, anywhere from who's eligible to vote to what exactly you're voting for, what's on the ballot, and the percentages. Those tend to be the things that people are a little hung up on as to clarification, as to some questions, and what the different percentages are of unit owners voting to approve different things throughout the community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those 3 things, and hopefully that clears up some of the questions that people are having. Number 1, who can vote? So obviously the unit owner on record can vote. If there's 2 of you on record for a single unit, one of you needs to be the one that votes. There's only 1 vote per unit. If it is in a trust, again, through the office, who is the designated person that will be your voter? We've even had siblings that have written a letter just confirming who that representative for the trust would be where voting is concerned. If it's a corporation, same thing. Who is that person that is your designated voter if it's under a corporation name? And unfortunately, if the owner is deceased, there should be a change then of who is on the record for property taxes and so on, as to who the current owner is going to be, or just a court document of who the manager of that property is. And it's not too complicated, but I just wanted to make sure everybody knew who within a unit was eligible to vote. And again, only 1 vote per unit. Where we've been talking about the vote and talking about declarations and bylaws, I don't know, and some people didn't vote the first time around, some people did, but there were some questions too as to the explanation of the 2 different things you were voting for on that ballot. So there's, as it'll say on the ballot, vote number 1 and vote number 2. Vote number 1 is probably a little more complicated because what you're voting for in vote number 1 are changes made to Article 11, Section 10, which is now the new Article 11, Section 6. And what this really talks about is the percentage that people need to vote in favor of a change to an amendment to the declaration. Now, that hasn't changed. It's always been 75% or 3/4 of the owners. What has changed from the old declaration to the new declaration is that who actually has the ability to make those amendments and those changes. What has changed is at the time that the original document was written, there was a corporation, the Mann Brothers, that were still in charge and controlling of the park. And so there were things that they could do and make changes that didn't require a vote from the other unit owners. That has since changed over time. So what the first thing you're voting for is just approving that any changes now made to the declaration is a 3/4, 75% vote of the owners. There's not that other level of corporate control that can make changes without the owner's approval to the declaration. So that's something that is a change, and obviously it's kind of changed over time. It's really been something we've been practicing, but it hadn't been changed in the declaration. Then vote number 2 is what we've really been focusing mainly on, are the update amendments to the actual declaration, which we kind of talked about in the other video, the first video, but then also the separation of the declaration and the bylaws, which are really 2 separate documents that were housed within that one document of the declaration. And the separation of those two still kind of count in this vote as an amendment to the declaration. So it still needs 75% or 3/4 of the vote for approval. So the two things are, updating the declaration. So it's only the voters that have that opportunity to amend it. And then the second is actually the changes we want to make, and the separation of the declaration and the bylaws. So just a little clarification on what exactly it is that you're looking at and what you are voting for when you vote on the ballot. So not as complicated, I think, as some people thought it might be. So when we look at vote number 2 and we look at changes that are being made to the declaration, but especially we're going to talk today about the bylaws. A lot of information has been going around concerning numerous changes to the percentage of votes that are needed in order to make different specific changes. And if there's been changes to those percentages in the proposed changes that are made to the bylaws. So I want to go over that a little bit. First of all, we as a condominium association have to follow Wisconsin Chapter 703 from the Wisconsin legislature that really dictates the operation of condo associations. So many of the percentages of vote that you're going to see are governed by that, and they're not even ones that we can make changes to. So that's important to know as we kind of move into this. Out of all, I went through all the bylaws, all the different changes, all the different percentages of votes to make changes and so on. There's only 2 in this whole change of proposal that we're looking at changing as a park. And so I'm going to talk about those 2 for a minute. The first one is what constitutes a quorum. So basically, a quorum is the idea of what's the minimum amount of owners that are present in order for them to be able to vote on something. And that's usually at a meeting. We see it mostly at the annual meeting, but it can be a scenario for other just regular board meetings we have or a specialty board meeting. So that would be a quorum. That's a minimum amount that you need to be present in order to take a vote on anything. Now, it had been in the previous declaration, previous bylaws, it had been a majority. So basically 50% plus 1. The proposed change in the bylaws now is for 40%. So 40% of was still right about 100 people to be present at a meeting in order for votes to be taken for changes to be made. And again, this is not on votes that require 3/4 or 2/3 of the vote, but other things that are considered to be a little more minor in the decision-making process, but still need a vote from the unit owners. So the quorum would go from, again, the majority, 50% plus 1, and go to 40%. So that would be the first change. Again, as we're talking about, that is still, 100 people. The second change would be in money approved for capital improvements. 2 changes that actually made to the bylaws. One was increasing the amount of money that could be spent by the board for capital improvements from $5,000 to $10,000. And it may seem like a big change, but when you're talking 1983 to 2026, that really isn't that big of a change over the 40 plus year amount of time. So that's one of the changes. So what it says in the bylaws then is that we need approval from the owners to spend more than that $10,000. And that's not on maintenance or repairs. That's on new capital improvement projects or building and so on. So to kind of make that a little more clear. Now, this is probably the biggest change. It was 2/3 of, the voting members to approve that extra amount of money. That has been, the proposal is changing that again to 40%. 40% of the owners approving that expenditure. And again, we're still talking, a little over 100 people to help make that decision of is money over $10,000 going to be spent on, again, a capital improvement type project, new building, new structures, and so on. So those are the only changes that are being proposed in any percentage of voting. So that I just kind of want to make clear. I did go through and look at all of the other different percentages that are needed to make different changes in the park and what those percentage votes are. And again, these have not changed, and many are dictated by the state of Wisconsin. So I'm going to look away just a minute to read a little bit. But as we talked about already, for a declaration change amendment, it's 3/4 or 75% of the voting members. To change a bylaw is 2/3 of the percentage of voting members to change and amend a bylaw. And not to get it confused with what we're doing right now with declarations, in splitting the declarations and the bylaws and making those changes, technically as we vote in the next couple of weeks, those bylaws are kind of still part of making a big change in the declarations. So it still requires 75% or 3/4 of a vote. A few other things that dictate a 2/3 vote, just to talk about a couple. If you want to change the number of members of the board, that would take a 2/3 vote. If you would like to dismiss a member of the board, that would take a 2/3 vote. If you would like to change the terms of a board member, right now all the terms are 2-year terms, that would take a 2/3 vote. If the board wants to borrow money or acquire property, that would be also a 2/3 vote. There are just a couple of more things that I'd like to talk about concerning voting. There are some things also, as noted in the bylaws, that will just take a majority vote, which is again 50% plus 1. A couple of these things are, and actually Connie brought it up in the meeting on Saturday, in compensating board members for some of the work that they were doing. And that would take, depending on what the scenario is that you're voting on, but that would take a vote of the majority, again, 50% plus 1 person of the voting members. So that's there, and that's within the voting of the bylaws. The other thing that would also be a majority is in a meeting when a quorum is reached in the meeting. So there are enough people, whatever percentage is decided on, to take the vote, that then if something is voted on, it has to be a majority of those members that are at the meeting after meeting a quorum. So it'd be, after the quorum is met, it'd be a majority of the members that are there at that meeting. The last one would be if we are contracting any major property management services and so on, that also takes a majority vote approval, and it can only be for a 1-year contract, 1 year at a time. So again, those are the things that actually in the bylaws talk about votes being taken. The other thing, and speaking of owners' rights to kind of go along with this, there are a couple owners' rights that I don't know if people are aware of. Number one, if the board proposes and passes a rule or regulation that owners don't agree with, they can basically submit, 25% of the owners can submit a an objection to that rule or regulation, which then would be automatically rescinded. And to vote it back into being would take 50% of the voters, the voting owners, to bring that back into fruition. So it would, to reverse the rescinding of that would take, half the owners to be able to do that. So that's kind of an interesting thing that I don't know if people are aware of. Also, the owners have an opportunity, if they want to call a special meeting, if they're not happy with something that's been going on at the park or there's major legal issue, they can also call a special meeting with a petition of 25% of the voting members of the park. So just to let you know, there are some different things out there that people probably aren't aware of. In the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the other changes that are made in the bylaws for this next voting session, which don't especially have to do with actually voting or percentage voting. Again, I want to encourage people to kind of do their homework, look over these documents, ask, myself or any other board member if you have any questions. Also, Judy Fallon is a good resource. You can talk to Connie, who's our former president. And if we don't know the answers, we will find the answers for you, and we'll do the research and talk to the attorney, whatever we need to do to find out answers for you. Also, don't forget that you can send me an email, whether my regular email that's posted or at the, wrdeclarations@gmail.com. If you have questions that maybe you don't want to ask in front of other people, whatever the scenario, but please feel like, we want you to be informed. If you don't understand something, please ask a question about it. There are some people I know last time that didn't vote because, as we've talked about before, they didn't want to get political. This is not political. This is 40 years in the making of a community that just needs to be updated, and updated to give actually you, the owners, a little more control and power over what occurs. So like I said, if you have any questions, please let one of us know. We want to make sure, again, I've talked many times about being transparent. So I want to make sure you have the accurate information. And if you have questions on it, please come and talk to one of us. So thank you very much, and I'll see you again in video number 3.